Alright, welcome back to Star Ocean Anamnesis. So today I've got a guide for you on Witch Evelysse, and it's been a while since I've done a guide for healers, so long in fact that I don't remember who the last one was. It was probably like Miracle or something, but let's go. Witch Evelysse is an offensively based healer. Her first talent, Witch on a Broomstick, gives her the ability to overheal, which means that she can add an additional 15,000 HP to everybody using long-range weapons, or an additional 10,000 HP to everybody else. Overheal kind of functions like armor, which means that it makes HP-based talents a bit more consistent, and on top of that, an extra 15,000 or 10,000 HP pushes most characters above 20,000 HP, which means that with a little bit of damage reduction, they should be able to survive hits from even Misery 4 bosses. And her second talent, Candy Rain, increases attack and int damage for the entire party by 40% whenever their HP is sitting at 100%, and it also increases their rush combo damage by 40% when their HP is sitting at 100%, and the hit count is above 200 hits. Like I said before, Overheal makes HP-based talents a bit more consistent, and Eve is taking full advantage of that with her attack and int damage buffs. Rush damage buffs are also very rare, so it's nice to see this one at a very low requirement of only 200 hits, which shouldn't be that difficult to achieve, and of course HP at 100% should be very easy to get as well. Unfortunately, Eve is kind of intruding in Defender territory with her attack and int damage buffs, but it's a pretty good buff nonetheless. And then her third talent, Sway in the Night Coral Lantern, reduces Eve's casting times by 80%, increases her int by 30% whenever she's at skill chain 3 or more, gives her full AP recovery speed while she's moving, and also gives her super armor while casting. An 80% cast time reduction makes her casts incredibly fast, which means that she can do her job of being a healer very well. The int plus 30% means that she can do a lot of damage with her Hot Servant attack, especially considering that she has AP recovery on that as well. She can recover AP while she is moving, which means that she can stay out of trouble very easily, and the super armor allows her to heal everybody without getting interrupted, so overall this is a very excellent talent. And her last talent, Mischievous Heart Deep Inside, recovers some AP to all allies after using Eruption and Flame Spear, and recovers 20 AP to everybody in the party after using Hot Servant. Now this is a fantastic talent. Eruption and Flame Spear recover about 5 AP each, which isn't too spectacular. However, Hot Servant recovers a whole 20 AP, which means with some AP cost reduction, you should be able to string together some ridiculously long combos, and you can do a ton of damage with it. And now moving on to her battle skills. First up, we have Eruption. It has an int multiplier of 220%, it does 2 hits, has a fire element, costs 15 AP, and it's a long-range attack. This is a pretty decent attack. Of course, it's not as good as Hot Servant, but it does come out very quickly, has a low AP cost, and recovers about 5 AP, which means it technically costs like 10 AP, and you can use it as perfect combo filler leading up into your Fairy Light or your Hot Servant. And speaking of Fairy Light, it has an int multiplier of 180%, costs 30 AP, and you can use it from long range. Why not? This is a pretty good multiplier considering its very quick cast times as well as low AP cost, and seeing as how Eve also has super armor while casting, she should be able to use this in pretty much any situation, so it's a pretty good heal. And then we have Flame Spear. It has an int multiplier of 250%, does 2 hits, costs 21 AP, has a fire element, and it can be used from long range. This attack isn't too bad, but considering that you want to save as much AP as you can for Hot Servant, Eruption is just a lot better in pretty much every regard, so I don't really recommend that you use this. And then lastly, we have Hot Servant. It has a 1070% int multiplier, it does 3 hits, costs 43 AP, has a fire element, and it's a long range attack. And this is Eve's best attack by far. It recovers 20 AP every single time you use it, which means it effectively only costs 23 AP, has a 1000% multiplier, which is pretty good, although Eve's int stat isn't that great, but it's also very fast, and of course you can spam the hell out of it. And then lastly, we have her Rush, Sweet Witchcraft, which has a 4000% int multiplier, has a fire element, and as a post-rush buff, it fully recovers everybody's HP, and it also increases attack and int damage for the entire party by 50%. This rush doesn't do a whole lot of damage, so it would make sense to put it at the start of the rush chain, use it as your opening act. And the post-rush buff has a full heal, which means you can use it in certain situations to save your teammates from death. And the attack and int damage buff, like I said before, is kind of intruding in Defender territory, and it's also not much better than Eve's pre-rush attack and int damage buff, but overall, this rush is pretty good because of the heal. Now, moving on to Eve's equipment, Eve is unfortunately locked to fire, which means that she can't really use any of the imbuement orbs, but luckily for her, there is a very good orb that you can get in the coin shop, the Blue Star Gadget. It increases int by 15%, gives Eve 10% damage reduction, and it also recovers 10% HP every 3 seconds. Out of all of of the free orbs, this is the best one for a healer. It's also one of the only ones. It has 10% damage reduction, which is fantastic for a healer. It allows her to tank through a lot of attacks while she's casting, and of course she has that super armor while casting. The int buff makes her attacks do a bit more damage and makes her heal a bit more powerful too. And the last factor is of course not really necessary because, you know, you're playing as a healer. And then, of course, a gotcha weapon that you can use is the Evil Pumpkin. It increases elemental damage by 20%, damage dealt to plants by 30%, crit chance and crit damage by 10% each, and it also gives you a 5% HP recovery every 3 seconds. And this orb should be used if you want your Eve to be a bit more offensive. The elemental damage makes her fire do 20% more damage. The crit chance and crit damage buffs always make a huge difference in the higher difficulties. And of course, if you have any of the other orbs that increase damage against certain types of enemies, like humanoids or demons, you could also very well run those. And then the last gotcha weapon I recommend is the Servant Koro Devil. It has fire imbuement, fire damage plus 50%, reduces AP cost by 30% at skill chain 3 or higher, and gives Eve a 30% damage reduction at long range. And this orb is pretty much the same thing as the Korometheus, except it has AP cost reduction, which I would say is a bit better for Eve, considering that she also has an int buff at skill chain 3. Damage reduction, like I said, is very good for Eve as well, but of course the weapon needs to be limit broken for that, and the fire damage makes her attacks do 50% more damage, so I would say this is probably the best weapon that you can get for her. And the accessory that I recommend you use with Eve is the Cameo Bolo Tie, which increases single target damage by 15% during charge assaults, and also reduces AP cost by 10% whenever you're at long range. I'm willing to say that this is probably Eve's best accessory by a long shot, which comes down to that 10% AP cost reduction that she gets. AP cost reduction, if I haven't said it before, is probably the best kind of buff that you can get for Eve, considering that she has AP recovery on her attacks as well. And everybody should have access to this accessory because you can get it right from episode 2 in the story, chapter 9. And when it comes to assists, as always, any kind of buffer will work, especially if they have AP cost reduction, like Celine for instance, or Exorcist Phase, and if you want to be a bit more selfish, you could also just go with Eris. And when it comes to her battle skills, there's really only one setup that you can run, so the first attack I recommend is Hot Servant, because it's of course her most powerful attack, and the 20 AP recovery really sets Eve apart. Then the second attack is Fairy Light, because, you know, a healer can't really forget about that. And then the last one is Eruption, because of its low AP cost. And with this setup, Eve's combo should look a little something like this. A normal attack into Hot Servant, into Eruption, into as many Hot Servants as you can fit. And of course, you can also fit a Fairy Light in there somewhere if you need to heal. And as a little refresher, Fairy Light is affected by the cancel bonus, so if you want to get those big heals, make sure you use it somewhere later in your combo. And when it comes to a party, Eve being a healer can fit into a lot of different parties, but she's also an offensive character, which means that she does appreciate int buffers. So the first character that I recommend you take with you is a Blue Sphere Leon. He can buff the entire party's attack and int stats based on hit count, he reduces the AP cost of the entire party, and he also increases their AP recovery speed. And secondly, I recommend an Idol Verda. She can increase the damage that enemies take. She has a ton of defensive buffs, like an HP buff and a buff that increases the defense of the entire party, and post-rush, she can also increase the attack and int damage that enemies take. And lastly, we'll finish it off with a Blue Sphere Claude. He has a party-wide damage buff, he can also increase the mobility of the entire party, and post-rush, he can increase their single target damage. So like I said before, Eve technically fits into a lot of different parties because she is a healer and she can perform that job no matter who she's paired up with. But she is an offensive character as well, which means that she does appreciate party-wide buffing from other characters. Unfortunately, Eve herself doesn't have a whole lot of buffs either, which means that she can't really shine unless she has those offensive buffs from other characters. So unfortunately, making parties with her is a little difficult, so she won't be that useful in public play, but she can do her job as a healer very well. So in short, Witch Evelysse is a very welcome addition to our roster of healers. She has a very powerful 20 AP recovery after using Hot Servant for the entire party, which allows everybody to spam their attacks like crazy. Add in some AP cost reduction as well as some invincibility like the Vanguard Mastery talent, and you should be able to make some very broken setups with this. Secondly, as a healer, she's also very reliable, which comes down to the fact that her Fairy Light has some short cast times. It has a low AP cost, and of course she also recovers 20 AP after using Hot Servant, so most of the time she should have enough AP to use her Fairy Light. And of course she also has super armor while casting. Her overheal also gives her a bit more room for error while healing, and on top of that she has a rush that fully restores the entire party's HP. Unfortunately, while Eve has a whole lot of utility, she doesn't have a whole lot in the way of buffing. Whereas most other healers usually have some form of Angel Feather, Eve doesn't really have that, and the only thing of note that she has is a rush damage buff. And then when you consider the fact that she herself requires a decent amount of buffs to do some actual damage, team building becomes a little difficult. Witch Evelysse is a very excellent healer, although personally I don't really think she'll be that useful in Misery 4, but her healing and AP recovery buff should make farming a bit easier. And that does it for my Witch Eve guide. Unfortunately I couldn't get her, but I'm sure she'll be back before long, so hopefully that was helpful, and I guess I'll see you guys later. Peace!